let's continue. Ryan, I might move to you for my first question. Are you able to tell us a bit more about penetration testing, but also the findings from the research that you undertook on how exposed our building management systems are?
Yeah, absolutely. So penetration testing, I think a lot of people might have a vague idea of what it is, but penetration testing really comes down to like what your goals are. It's effectively trying to attack a system or break into something, but the goals are very different. In some cases, you've got a web application you're about to deploy and you want to do your due diligence, make sure, there's no problems with it before you put it on the internet. In other cases, you've just got your new fancy smart building and you want to know, hey, they said it was secure, but is it? So there's a lot of like trying to verify controls, verify what you have in place. In terms of what we actually found when we were scoping out the Australian internet space, we managed to dig up the better part of 5,000, 6,000 results for building management systems. So what we did is we went and took a look at some of the major vendors on the market, and then we effectively looked at what their devices look like remotely, and then we've used a few different specialized search engines to try and collate that data together. And it was very quick and easy to find that in a lot of these situations, they were devices that were out of date. Like they actually hadn't been patched seemingly since they were actually installed. So we're talking like anywhere from a decade onwards. And this is like one of the major problems. The vulnerabilities, they do pile up over time. The older things are, the worse they get. But yeah, that was effectively what we'd found.
Thank you. I might just go straight to QC on the back of this one. QC, can you tell us, in what ways a BMS can be designed, but also specified and operated to try to reduce this level of vulnerability?
So as I do in my self-introduction, I started with building automation. So in the past BMS design, it works more like a silo system and it focuses on the functionality. The BMS works like just a single system, and the hackers is very difficult to hack in, and there are very little data for them to steal. But in the recent years, the growth of IoT technologies have made itself reliable, accessible, and affordable. Landlords and occupiers start to ask for the massive deploying IoT and how to make their space smarter. So naturally, more data will be generated, captured, and we will start look to how to leverage the cloud data analytics to have data processing, smarter algorithm, and also even for reporting to the management and also the visualization to the users. So with internet being introduced into the building systems, there are higher risks of exposing to the cyber attack. And usually there are two important steps to strengthen the building systems and mitigate the risks. The first is to design the system interoperability with still network segregation to put them into isolation. So the firewall is the important role here to be configured to recognize the functional blocks while blocking the suspicious high volume of traffic flows. If the two systems are not supposed to have data exchange for such a high volume, they should be recognized and blocked. This is to prevent a single point of failure resulting in a total of the system failure. Not to mention that a fish tank leak may result in casino data being stolen for 10 GB as an example. The second step is to keep the cyber security practice up to date and maintain the firmware and software patches to be the latest stable version. This has to be conducted together with the manufacturer and go with the recommendation. It is usually often overlooked after the design construction, I would say. So we must make sure that the operation and maintenance contract and the operation team must include this into their procedures. That is regular firmware and software updates.
Thank you, QC. Listening to that last point in particular, I can't help but think of our ECI, early contractor involvement. So Charlie, a question for you. Would you agree that it's important for cyber experts to get in at the early stage, but also how would it actually work? How do you make it happen if that's the case?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important because we've had some great points there, but getting the two specialists together, someone who really understands penetration testing, someone who really understands the systems, the infrastructure, how it all works, tying them together at the start, building in all of this new smart tech, all the ESG tech that we're getting put into buildings at the minute, and designing and architecting it correctly at the start is really key, especially in new buildings. If that's not to say it can't be done from a retrofit point of view, it absolutely can. And we talk about that a bit more in the white paper as well. But you get them together because people look at things from different angles. You'll have your specialists from a cybersecurity point of view looking at one angle, buildings and how people are going to flow around the building, how it's going to work, what needs to be accessed from where. And yeah, you can get the best outcome all around. So it's really, really important.
Thank you very much. I like the BMS topic a lot because that's my previous role, but I want to move to other vulnerabilities that we have, in particular, social engineering. And Hartmut, it's a question that I'm going to send to you. I'm going to send that your way. What's this, the human component in all of this? We're talking about cyber, social engineering. We have seen it's been responsible for many forms of attacks. What's our role and how do you deal with it?
Okay. Now, social engineering is a big issue, not only in cybersecurity, also in physical security. And this can be just as simple as borrowing another person's credential or seemingly having an innocent conversation with the goal to find out somebody's PIN. And of course, we know all these classic examples of bogus emails and phone calls that are urgent and of course asking us for sensitive information. So we all know of that, but something less on our radar, but still very important and also considered social engineering is, for example, tailgating. Tailgating is when a person follows another person through a door without actually presenting a credential. And it needs to be understood by all staff actually, that this is not a harmless thing, but it can have drastic consequences, from tailgaters stealing information to causing bodily harm. And security is everybody's responsibility, not only the security departments. Now, we all accept the constant trainings about IT security. We have accepted and understood that this is important and everybody's responsibility. And exactly the same must be true for physical security. Otherwise, we might have a tailgater make his way into the IT room and steal the entire server. Where would that leave all the IT security efforts? Now, physical security training for all staff need to be as normal as IT security training. And physical penetration tests, just as along like the IT security penetration tests, need to be conducted as well. And many times, and that needs to be understood, the weakest link is not the equipment, but it's the human factor.
I feel targeted with that comment at the end, but I want to go to Waterstons. We just heard him tell us about the cyber but physical aspects. Do you have other examples, maybe from the research or just past experience, you could share with us today?
Yeah, so in terms of physical, there's a lot of different ways. So when we're talking social engineering and when we're talking pen testing in general, right, the first thing you're doing in any of these situations is you're trying to gather information. You want to try and understand as much as you can about this organization. You're looking for very abject sorts of things as well. So you're looking for things like who comes in and handles their air conditioners, what electricians do they use, what staff do they have coming in, what do the badges look like, which is another point on this, and that is with the recon, a lot of the times you'll typically employ something called OSINT or open source intelligence. And in these cases, you're doing things like scrolling through social media, you're using LinkedIn to see who works there, what they do, you're finding their Instagram pages and whatnot. Maybe they'll have drinks in the office where they're wearing the badge that typically they'll wear inside. Maybe you'll see a card sitting on a desk or a password written on a notepad, a sticky note stuck on a screen. Like, this is the sort of abject information that you can't necessarily control, but is out there. And these are the interesting sorts of ways that you can actually attack an organization.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, some great things that our guys have been doing as well. So one of them loves to play with basically hacking card machines to get into buildings, which is really easy these days. You can buy literally the devices on the web to do it. And the other thing, I tried it the other day in our building. We're looking at physical pen testing. I literally went to the cafe over the road, had no information on me, made sure I tailgated someone who didn't know me, walked into the building behind them. They did a swipe card because I had coffee in my hand. They were polite, kept the door open for me. I then made sure I stayed behind them. They then went to the elevator, swiped to get into the elevator. They politely let me in again and asked me which floor I was on. They swiped then and pressed the button for me. I was all the way up to our floor without any information or anything. And that's how easy it is to do these days. And sometimes it's politeness. So agreeing with everything that's been said, from Ryan and Hartmut and others, that it's critical to educate your staff on this type of thing, because it's inbuilt in humans to be polite, where actually people will play off on that to get into buildings. Sorry, just wanted to add that.
No, thank you very much. I was just trying to think of all the risks we've listed between, whatever's inherited from, past life or tenants. Then you've got the human factor. We're talking about the BMS. And Julian, I know you've been quiet, so I'm coming with a spicy one now. Are those smart buildings a liability in the end, more so than an asset? What's your take on this?
I think there's inherent risks in there, but as a user of buildings and also a designer of buildings, there's some fantastic things that you can do with a smart building. The interactivity that you can create between the tenants, or even just in terms of maintenance and operations, there's some amazing things you can do. I think for us, what's super important is the list of things that you can do in a smart building is longer than my arms and legs, probably. There's lots of things you can do. And as designers and advisors of our clients, we get asked often with a one-liner, can I have a smart building, please? Which is interesting, because what does that mean? So we spend quite a lot of time actually working with our clients to explain what that means. And so talking to them about functionality and understanding for them what the business case is that goes with that functionality, because there is no point in doing it if there's no return on that investment. So collecting data or having functionality is of no benefit. So it's super important to understand why you're doing these things. And it might be, why are you investing in the app that the tenants can use that can dial up a coffee and find a cafe around the corner? That will be because there's a business case around the rental income that you can achieve from having that facility within your building. That's why you do it. That's what makes you afford it. So you've got to go through all of those elements to understand why you do it. And then if you can understand what that value is to you, then it becomes an opportunity, not a risk. You, of course, then have to look at how you secure all of that. And I guess if we look back in a few years when we used to put these systems into buildings, they were very discrete things that went in. They never talked to each other. Often it was very difficult to get them to talk to each other. Whereas now, all of these systems are sitting on integrated networks. And so what we find is that there's a new role involved in the design of these buildings, and that is the system integrator, the IT integrator. Someone has to design that network that all these things are plugging into. And that's, I guess, one of the roles that we come into as Cundall, is that integration piece. What does that network look like? How is it structured? How is it secure? Because you might have security devices on one end of it, and you might have coffee machines on the other end of it. You don't want them talking to each other. So we will facilitate that once we've understood what all of the pieces of the smart puzzle are, to design that infrastructure that then makes it secure and useful.
I echo this. I mean, working at Procore, when we talk about technology, the what is important, but the why, understanding what you're trying to achieve, the information you're trying to get and maintain is probably the first step. So keeping that in mind, QC, I want to move to you now. Could you share with us some of the basic smart building features that we need for what I think are other topics or elements we all should be focusing on? So that includes energy reduction, QC, but also maintenance or the well-being of our tenants. What are some of the main features we should be looking for?
Thank you, Jeremy. So we talk about the well-being and maintenance. Let me share with one example from one of my Singapore clients. This client has just recently acquired a 20-year-old office and retail mixed office tower in the CBD of Singapore. And since it's a legacy building, everything is so old, from the facade on the external to the internal of the BMS, access control, car park management, etc. The client hoped to upgrade this legacy building into an outstanding landmark in the CBD. And smart building application is one of the key upgrades. And this is a conclusion after lots of discussion on why are we doing this, how are we going to achieve that, is it valuable to do that, can we get rental premium, etc., as what Julian has just described. So in conclusion, there are a few areas that the client is agreed to implement. The first is to upgrade the lift services, which to improve the vertical transportation. So it reduces people's time waiting for the lift during the rush hours in the morning and in the afternoon. The second upgrade is to upgrade the access control system. So with the mobile technology now being more mature, we can now use the mobile as an access pass to go through the gantry. Of course, people can forget about the fob, but they won't forget about the mobile phones to work. The third one is to have the environmental measurements, such as some of the IQ parameters, and all of these parameters will be created, the history will be trained, and we will collect it and report it through various channels, such as digital displays along the lift lobby, and also the mobile apps, which when they access to the building, they can get notification about their environment, how good is my working environment today, and also the website. So other things that we are considering to upgrade includes a public and secure Wi-Fi access in the public area, including the retail floors and also the office lobbies. So this is to benefit the users or visitors. And we are also looking to integrate all the building systems such as car park management system, the BMS, the CCTV into a converged network backbone for easy management. So the approach to do that is to adding an additional layer of smart building application platform into this project to enable all the data to be digitalized and ingested into the platform, and all the analytics and visualization will be done through the cloud platform. Smart building is always a big matrix, and it means differently for different users. So I will not be surprised in Australia if an employee wish to access the building easily and control their lighting and air conditioning above them. And maybe for facility managers, you may wish to track the user complaints and respond them on time, and keeping the building HVAC systems up and running with minimal interruption from the maintenance activities. So I hope you can find similarities from what I've shared in my Singapore projects. And hopefully we can see more and more smart buildings being developed all over the world.
Thank you, QC. I think smart buildings are not going anywhere, but hopefully we can keep up with the technology and understand what our role is. So I realize we started a bit late and I don't want to finish too late. I'm also the only man in 2 questions between you all and more drinks. So 2 more questions, panelists, and then we'll go to just an open floor and go back to a few drinks. I want to go back to the legacy systems because we mentioned it, we touched on it earlier on. So Julian, I'll go back to you on this one. What are some of the main issues that you've encountered when working with those legacy systems, like your older BMSs that sort of have been, segregated or used with segregated networks, like a top 3 big problems, issues?
Legacy systems are tricky because technology moves so fast. I mean, we know that with our mobile phones, and if you've bought any smart home equipment recently, you'll find that this year it works and next year it doesn't, and it doesn't talk to something in a couple of years' time. So, the wonderful thing about IT is the way that it evolves quickly and all of this new functionality. But the challenge with that and the flip side of that is it gets out of date and it won't talk and it can't kind of communicate. So when we go in to look into existing buildings, we often find systems that are out of date, no longer available, parts that are, way past their life. So that's probably good and bad. It's good because you're then looking to replace those systems with more up-to-date ones, which will typically communicate with each other better. But it doesn't mean you're throwing away some equipment, but it's often well past its use by date at that point. There are other systems that sort of piggyback on top of existing systems and just sort of take specific bits of data and then go and do things. And that's a little bit easier to implement. and you know, there's a whole host of other challenges in between. But typically, in the modern environment, a lot of these things do talk to each other. We will always specify open networks, open protocols to try and maximize the opportunity both now and in the future. That's not always possible because there is just a little bit too much proprietary stuff in this space. So we just have to be super careful with how we specify it. And I think how you also procure a smart building with a client, I think you have to work a little more openly, be a little bit more cognizant of the risks, perhaps procure in a slightly more open way. You can't just unload all your risk to all the vendors. I think you've got to engage with them, build them into the system, get them on board and sort of work with them and pull it all together. That's where we see the most success, be it old or new. You know, you really got to engage with the vendors, the integrators, the systems, the apps, and all these things to really make it successful, because there's a lot going on in a smart building.
Yeah, it does take a village. Waterstons, Charlie or Ryan, anything to add on this point?
Legacy's the worst. We've started referring to hackers as technical debt collectors. But effectively, yeah, the older these things get, vulnerabilities come out all the time. And it's just getting more and more and more as more attackers enter this space. So over time, your things are just getting more and more insecure. So yeah, one of the biggest considerations is just how can you lock these systems away? How can you segregate them off so that only the people who need to access them can access them? Likewise with the systems. So yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is don't forget about the old system in the corner. We've talked about segregating networks. We've talked about making sure we're doing the right things. We've seen some unfortunate attacks where the old CCTV system hasn't been upgraded for a while and it's on the network, or even a fish tank was the worst one we've seen. It was a smart fish tank that's allowed something to come in. But yeah, it's the same story. So I'll keep it short though. Appreciate running
Thank
late.
you. Hartmut, I saw you nod a lot. Do you have anything else you want to add maybe before we go to the last question? I promised the last one.
Yeah, I just have three things to say: security convergence, and security convergence.
I've got a feeling you answered the question I wanted to ask. Now, I want to wrap up with a big ticket item. So we covered a lot of topics. I'm sure all of you could have gone in depth on many of those. So please, for those here, please engage with our panelists. But to wrap it up, big ticket item, one piece of advice for all of us to walk away and try to implement in our own companies or test out. Hartmut, I'll start with you. I've got a feeling I know what you'll say.
Well, as I just said, security convergence is key, along with training for physical and, of course, IT security. Everybody needs to understand that this is really what we all need to do. This is all our responsibility and not just one department's.
Thank you, QC. Same question. Your big ticket item.
It's the overlooked items that I just mentioned. So to keep the software and firmware updated, if everything was being kept so updated, the best practice are implemented, I believe even as a legacy system, there are little rooms for hackers to get in.
Thank you. Julian, can you share with us? Sorry, yeah, we're playing the musical mic. One piece of advice, Julian.
I think once you've written the one-liner, can I have a smart building, please? I think you need to sit back and get the right people in the room to help you work out what that means. And it won't be one or two people, it could be a dozen or so to get the thing properly scoped out and really understand what you need and how to keep it secure. It's a team effort.
Thank you. Ryan, we'll go to you for the final words. The piece of advice, big ticket item.
You're really doing the who, what, when, where, why, but 100%. You need to understand like what you have running your systems, what you have in your network. There's a lot that's sort of overlooked. One of the things that came out of what we found online is a lot of the organizations that were tied to these smart buildings that we're finding, they weren't small organizations. They didn't have a crappy security spend or an IT spend. They were fairly good, but it was just a matter of probably IT didn't even know that this was a thing they had to keep an eye on. Probably security didn't even know that this is a problem. So just know what you have and know who's responsible for it as well.
Same question. You know what's coming.
Very similar to what everyone said, but what I would say is make sure it's built from the start and it's driven together. Don't drive it as a technology problem. Don't drive it only as an ESG problem. Don't drive it from just one angle or another. It's a joint problem that everyone needs to work together on, like Julian was saying. And if you tie it all together, know what you've got, understand the systems, understand the data, where it is and what you need to protect and what you don't, then you should be good.
Thank you,
you.
Charlie. So this is the wrap of this conversation. Open floor if you have any questions. Oh, we have one right there. I don't think you need a mic, so go for it.
No, I'm quite loud. One question. How safe are our buildings? I'm very interested in the sort of overarching appraisal of kind of the typical stock in, say, the Sydney CBD, Singaporean CBD, and the new smart stock. How concerned should we be? It's on a scale of 1 to 10, don't worry about it as a 1 and 10 farm buildings. Where would you say the concern should be?
Don't think I could quite put a number on it. Some people are better than others, but I'm yet to walk into a meeting with a client where I don't have several ways to break into their infrastructure. Likewise with buildings, you're always going to find something. There's always something. And trying to get an idea of, what you have. One of the things that we've been trying our hardest to instill in a lot of our clients is a mindset of you're not really going to get far if you're looking from the inside out. If you're sitting there with a spreadsheet of all the things that you've implemented or whatever, that's not as useful as having an attacker come and try and find what they can find. It's about finding those unknowns, right? Because those are the things that are going to get you done at the end of the day. I think Optus was an excellent example of this. They weren't really monitoring the subdomains that they had, and as a result, some devs just opened up their production database with 9.3 million Australians' information in it. Had they been monitoring that, that's a different story. And that's the same sort of idea applies here. It's understanding what you have and then having people responsible for it as well.
I just add to that. So if you're worried about your building, if you don't know what your risks are, then your risk's very high, if you put it that way. So if you don't understand what it is, then you haven't planned for it. So
Nobody put a number on it, I think, but obviously everybody's been very, very smart in the way they answered. Yeah.
yeah, I'll let others add as well. Sorry, I had to jump in. But yeah, I'd say there is. It's why we wrote the white paper. It's why we collaborated on it. We wanted to get the message out there. People are starting to worry about it, or in some cases they're really worried about it, which is good in a way because then they're doing something about it. But until people start thinking about this as a joint effort instead of an IT problem or an ESG problem or something like that, it's going to be a challenge because then it's only driven from one area of the business or one area of the build, and there's a pushback from another area. So yeah, I'd say it is quite a big problem, but hence why we're here today talking about it.
So are we lacking leadership on this for everybody to bring everybody together? Could that be something we need to look at?
I think I guess I'm reflecting on the people that we bump into on a day-to-day basis when we go into buildings and talk to them and find out what's going on in buildings. There's a very much a focus on the spanners and the screwdrivers and the wires and the bits and pieces. And I think there's probably less focus around the data networks, the integrated electronics that are in the back of it. You get a very broad range of people and skills within the building operations and management space. And I think the report is really a bit of a wake-up call to say, just hang on a minute, there's a piece here that we've not really probably thought about enough. And particularly as technology gets on more and more, there's more to do. You know, traditionally, a lot of this stuff was solid state. It was simple. You put it in and you let it run out. And then when it broke, it broke. You know, we're talking much more intelligent devices now, which have more maintenance requirement, more, you know, trickery behind them, and therefore more risks and more gateways in. So I think it's time to upskill our building maintenance and operations people to be aware of this. And it comes back to Charlie's question. You need to know what you've got and what your risks are and how to manage it. And away you go.
Thank you. Hartmut or QC, I know we've got the mic, but do you want to add anything?
Can you please repeat the question?
That would actually be good, yeah.
Did you want to repeat the question?
Yeah.
No, because we couldn't hear it. When it comes from the audience, we can't hear it here. Sorry.
We were talking about the skills in property. About are we lacking the skills? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Are we lacking the skills in property or construction around, sort of cybersecurity? There's IT, which is moving ahead, but do we have a chasm that we need to fill from a skills perspective for property and construction companies?
Oh, I think that the skills are there. It's just a matter of are they being siloed or are they not? And that is coming back to my original point of convergence. Not only security convergence, but anything that goes on a network needs to be, well, discussed by all of the parties involved. That could even go down to an approach of zero trust, where really every last device on the network needs to be scrutinized down to the very last detail. So I don't think it's a security it's a skill problem. It's a matter of opening it to the floor and having everybody discuss it.
Thank you. We're just putting the ceiling mics on, so it'll be easier for our guest on the line. Thank you, Tara. Yes.
Thank you. How linked are the building systems to the more critical, like the actual IT infrastructure of the bank or Optus, or maybe a hospital? Like, how linked are the building systems to the critical health infrastructure? Is that linkage a risk? Because I mean, if someone breaks into a BMS, I'm a bit concerned, but they turn the air conditioning up and down. That's not really critical. Could be, but maybe it could be. But compared to, say, getting into the banking details or switching off, critical medical equipment, how linked are we seeing that in buildings? Is that the risk?
I'll kick it off and I'll let the experts. I mean, it just comes down to the design of those networks. It could be completely integrated, and you could do anything from anywhere, which is quite scary. That probably wouldn't be what we'd recommend. You'd want to partition it in some way, and you would clearly probably have air gap separation between some critical financial systems or critical data systems or whatever. So I think that's a key consideration in the design of that network, which we didn't used to have to think about too much. How do you create all of the right separation? Do you need connectivity? Do you need air gaps? What do you do? And that's that integrator role to work out what that network looks like, because it could be quite an extensive thing, which didn't used to be an issue for us as designers.
Yes, brilliant point. It absolutely does come down to the design of the network itself. When you're talking an organisation like CommBank, for instance, they're pretty well renowned in Australia for just a killer IT team, killer security team as well. But that being said, not all IT security teams are built equal. Some of the stuff that we've seen on the open internet is just atrocious. We're talking pumping systems for town's water supplies, just completely open for anyone to go and play with. I think my favourite was a crematorium in Queensland, and it was just the controls for actually controlling the furnace itself. So it can be bad. It can be very bad. And the problem is, in these situations, you have engineers who are going in and they're setting up these systems specifically, right? They're from John's crematorium suppliers. And they come out and set this up, and all they know is they just need to make it so that units can be controlled or viewed from the office, right? They don't realise that they're opening this to the entire world. And so you get this sort of stuff kicking around. There's lots of it as well, like lots of industrial control systems and whatnot that are just sort of on the internet. And it's actually like one of those more terrifying things that I love showing people. So it's just, yeah, it's pretty nuts. But again, it does come down to that design. Was this designed with, security in mind in the first place? Did someone sit down and think to themselves like, oh, this major critical system that runs all the water in this town probably shouldn't be accessible from the other side of the world at any given point in time, right?
And just to sort of add that on the data, because yes, health data, things like that's critical. But if you think about it in buildings these days with the energy efficiency agenda, some companies are actually saying this building will be sufficient over this number of years, or will reach net zero by this point, and this is reporting. What if that data was manipulated or was hacked, and then there was fines to that company because this building wasn't as efficient as it said it was going to be? And how could you prove that and monitor it and manage it? So while I agree it's not as critical as health information, it can be critical for certain things that could lead to big fines for buildings and things like that.
Sorry, just that point. So I forgot about that part. If you look at like the average spend of a large building on electricity, being able to get into a building management system, you can actually like tweak that up pretty aggressively. And the thing about building management systems is when they don't work properly, you don't notice it. Like the lights are left on. Who's going to really go, oh, that's a problem. We're spending more on electricity. It's the same with air conditioning. If it's like 1 degree higher, no one in the room's going to know. But your HVAC and your aircon systems themselves, they're now showing up way harder. You can effectively, like if you were to scope out all the buildings building management company had, and then you were able to find a vulnerability where you could potentially leave the lights on, or you could potentially like bring the aircon up 1 degree, you're talking like into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think the Opera House alone spent $1.2 million last year on their electricity bill. If you were able to increase that spend by say 5%, that's a substantial amount, right? So yeah, BMSs on a smaller scale, it's not a huge deal if someone can mess with it. On the bigger scale though, absolutely, there's some damage to be done there.
I'd like to just add on, Jeremy.
Yes.
Yeah. So I do understand that sometimes BMS data in certain area is quite concerning, and let's put it in the way that even in healthcare, not just healthcare, education or universities, offices, there are always interest on the BMS data. How much water do I consume? Is my building HVAC system, air conditioning system behave abnormally? I need to know them early so that I can shut down my data center on time, or I can switch off certain healthcare equipment off on time. So therefore, it comes to the question of we need to justify the business case. What kind of data do I need to deliver? And do I need to share the data from the healthcare system back to the BMS? Or is it just one way of traffic from the BMS to the healthcare system? So as long as we establish the ground on how are we going to, what kind of data we are going to share, how are we going to share, and how are we going to protect and properly regulate the data flow, I think with that we can safeguard our interest. I mean, really safeguard our interest with operational monitoring as well. So it is not an easy say of whether is it a risk to the healthcare system. Of course, it is if we don't implement a proper assessment and also the cybersecurity protection.
Thank you, QC. I think we're going to wrap it up now. No, we're heading
Sorry,
away.
one more question. So as individuals, what we're probably most at risk from is a partner or somebody who's known to us. In a building situation, what does that risk variable look like? Is it the outside person or is it your inside HR issues that are most, that you're most vulnerable to?
It's interesting. Those are two sort of I don't know, different sort of sides of one coin, because you do have that insider risk, right? That insider risk is a situation where you need to understand how your staff is sort of moving within the organisation. And I don't mean like physically, I mean like talking about between roles, talking about staff becoming disgruntled and potentially wanting to do some damage or some internal espionage, what have you. So that can be fairly high. It does come down to an internal culture. If you've got an internal culture that's like very laid back, etc., and you have like those more holistic sort of things like career progression, etc., then you're sort of minimizing these risks conversely without really realizing it. In terms of the external risk, then I remember one of the organisations that I used to do audits on in Sydney, their entire building, just outside the elevator doors, they had pictures of the 3 different contractors you're likely to see, and there's like pictures of their uniforms. And I mean, that's the sort of information where if you've got that, you can effectively just walk into the place and nobody's going to really question you. I mean, it's drilled into them every time I try and go down and get a copy of it. So the risk itself, again, it sort of varies between like organisation to organisation. It also does vary between when you're talking in like insider risk versus like external third party. But there are ways to minimise it. In terms of third party risk, you can look for things like are they ISO 27001, are their staff like complying with certain policies? And there's also like your own internal policies as well, like how are you checking people in? How are you making sure that they're being verified, etc., etc.? Are your staff being trained to question people that are just sort of following them in? How does like physical access to your building look? Is there gates with a tag, or is it doors that people are holding open? Is it just an elevator? So yeah, there's a lot of sort of interesting ways to tackle these things.
Thank you. Okay, let's wrap it up. Can we have a round of applause for our speakers today? Thank you very much.
Thank you, questions as well, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. Hartmut and QC, thank you very much as well for joining us from Singapore.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.